In the dark December of 1940, the Battle of Britain had been won, but the Blitz was raging. London was burning. On the map, the British Empire looked vast, but the government knew a terrifying secret. It was financially broke. Winston Churchill wrote a humiliating letter to U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt. He had to admit that Great Britain, the banker of the 19th century, could no longer afford the ammunition needed to survive. It was a plea for survival, an admission of insolvency. The war Hitler launched was a war of machines. Blockaded from Europe, Britain had to import everything from the officially neutral United States, but American law demanded cash and carry. Britain had to pay in cash and transport supplies on its own ships. To meet these demands, Britain drained its treasury. In a secret mission, Operation Fish, the nation's entire gold wealth was shipped across the Atlantic to pay the American bill collectors. By late 1940, the gold was gone. Britain had no dollars left to buy planes and tanks. President Roosevelt knew if Britain fell, America was next. But U.S. law forbade giving money, and the public would be outraged. He needed a solution that looked like a business deal, not a handout.
If your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't haggle. You lend him the hose.
Before the United States gave a single dime of aid, Treasury Secretary Morgenthau demanded a full audit of the British Empire. He wanted Britain to prove it had stripped itself of every last asset. The British were stunned, feeling treated not as an ally, but as a failed company. The most painful symbol of this forced liquidation was American Viscose Corporation, a massive British-owned rayon manufacturer in the U.S. Morgenthau demanded its sale to pay for existing weapons orders. With the Lend-Lease bill facing opposition in Congress, he needed to show Britain was bleeding. The ultimatum was brutal: sell American Viscose, or Lend-Lease would die. Under immense pressure from Washington, Britain was forced to sell its assets. The American Viscose Corporation, worth over $100 million, was seized and sold for half its value. The liquidation extended to the empire itself. Desperate for warships, Churchill begged Roosevelt for 50 old destroyers. Roosevelt traded them. In exchange for the rusting ships, the United States demanded 99-year leases on British naval bases across the Atlantic. It was a geopolitical fire sale, trading long-term strategic assets for short-term survival. The U.S. was absorbing the British Empire, not by conquest, but by contract. The Lend-Lease Act was hailed as the arsenal of democracy, providing the tanks, planes, and food that kept Britain alive. But the aid was not a gift. It was a lease, with a reckoning to come. Buried in the text was Article 7, a poison pill for the British Empire. In return for aid, Britain had to dismantle its imperial preference system, the economic wall that protected its trade. The British knew it meant the end of their empire as an economic unit, but they had no choice. The cash was gone. They signed. As the U.S. entered the war, the financial disparity with Britain only grew. American industry exploded. While British factories made only Spitfires, American factories made Spitfires refrigerators, stealing Britain's commercial future. By 1944, the transfer of wealth was absolute. The world's gold moved from London to Fort Knox. The British believed their sacrifice would be honored after the war. They believed there would be a soft landing. They were wrong. The bill would come due. On August 15, 1945, World War II was over. But as Britain celebrated, a bureaucratic machine in Washington switched gears. 7 days later, President Truman terminated Lend-Lease. The cutoff was brutal and immediate. American ships loaded with aid were ordered to turn around. The lifeline was severed. With Lend-Lease cut off, legendary economist John Maynard Keynes saw Britain faced a financial Dunkirk. The country was bankrupt, not in a year, but instantly. In September 1945, a dying Keynes sailed to Washington as a supplicant. He argued Britain deserved a $6 billion grant for its wartime sacrifice, calling it justice. But the Americans, wary of Britain's new socialist government, refused. There would be no gift. There would only be a loan on harsh commercial terms. The Americans offered a loan of $3.75 billion, but it came with strings attached. The most poisonous condition was sterling convertibility. Within a year, anyone holding British pounds could exchange them for US dollars. Keynes knew this was a death trap. A run on the pound would drain the loan in weeks, as everyone wanted superior American goods. But with Britain facing starvation, Parliament reluctantly accepted, calling it a financial Munich, appeasing their ally just to survive. The harsh winter of 1947 brought Britain to a standstill. Then, the American loan conditions kicked in. On July 15th, Britain made the pound convertible. The result was a financial massacre. The world rushed to sell pounds for dollars, and the loan money evaporated. After just 5 weeks, Britain was forced to suspend convertibility, admitting total failure. The humiliation was complete. The British Empire had tried to play by American rules and been crushed. This financial weakness had immediate geopolitical consequences. This was the moment the baton of world power was officially dropped by London and picked up by Washington. In February 1947, the British government sent a secret telegram to the US State Department. It was a message of resignation. For a century, Britain had been the guardian of Greece and Turkey, keeping the Russians out of the Mediterranean. But now, with the treasury empty, Britain could no longer afford to pay the soldiers or subsidize the Greek government. The telegram essentially said, "We are broke. We are leaving. If you want to stop the communists, you have to do it." This telegram triggered the Truman Doctrine. The United States stepped in to fill the vacuum. It was the formal acknowledgement that Britain was no longer a superpower capable of shaping global events. It was a regional power trying to keep the lights on. The economic misery dragged on. In 1949, with the economy still stagnant and the reserves low, the government was forced to devalue the pound. Before the war, the pound had been worth $4.86. In 1949, it was slashed to $2.80. Overnight, the British people became 30% poor relative to the rest of the world. Imports became more expensive. The cost of living rose. It was a recognition that the British economy was no longer competitive. The final bill for the war was a mortgage spanning generations. Through the Anglo-American loan of 1946, Britain paid the US for 6 decades, with the final payment only made in 2006. Britain won the war but was bankrupted. The true winner was the United States, which didn't conquer the British Empire with armies. It bought it. For the British people, the legacy of 1941 remained a scar on the national psyche. It created a lingering sense of decline, a feeling that the best days were in the past. It fueled the special relationship which was always a polite euphemism for dependency. When Winston Churchill wrote that letter to Roosevelt in December 1940, he saved his country from Hitler, but he also signed the deed of sale. He traded the empire for survival. It was a deal that had to be made. There was no other choice. But the cost was the future. Britain emerged from the war as a moral giant but an economic pygmy. It had spent its inheritance to buy freedom for Europe. It was a noble sacrifice, perhaps the noblest in history. But in the cold, hard light of economics, it was a liquidation. The empire didn't fall. It was sold off piece by piece to pay the bill for doing the right thing. I'm John, and this is the Cinematic History Tales channel. Subscribe now to stay ahead of the curve, because when the history books are written, you'll want to be among the few who saw it.